They told you the Bible was complete, closed, perfectly edited by divine hands. But what if I told you some of its most mind-altering texts were deliberately erased? Not because they were false, but because they were too real, too dangerous, and far too empowering. Buried beneath centuries of silence are books that speak of giants, secret gospels, satanic altars, and spiritual contracts that would make your spine shiver. These weren't myths. They were warnings, maps to hidden knowledge that threatened every earthly throne, including Satan's throne itself. And the most disturbing part? Many of these texts reveal a terrifying truth. The law of attraction, the power of the mind were present all along, disguised in ancient language, stripped from a narrative, hidden in plain sight. Because once people realize their thoughts can bend reality, the game changes. If this kind of forbidden knowledge sparks something in you, you're not alone. That's exactly why this channel exists. So if you're ready to uncover what they try to keep in the dark, subscribe now, because what's coming next isn't just shocking, it's transformational. They never wanted you to read them. Books like the Book of Giants or the Apocalypse of Peter weren't just removed. They were buried, labeled too disturbing or imaginative. They vanished from the mainstream Bible. But what if that was the point? What if behind these bans was a fear of awakening the power of the mind? Imagine finding out that entire scrolls were hidden because they didn't match the political version of heaven and hell. That's not faith, that's editing. And when you dig into these forbidden texts, you realize they challenge the very foundation of what many were taught to believe. They don't fit the mold. They reveal cracks in the throne, and not just any throne, but Satan's throne, sitting silently behind a veil of theology. This isn't just history, it's a mirror. These texts expose a deeper spiritual war between free will and domination. It's not just about religion, it's about control. And that's where the law of attraction sneaks back into the story. Because if belief is power, then what happens when they hide the real beliefs from you? They weren't bedtime stories. The Book of Giants describes beings so massive and unnatural, they made the earth tremble. These were the Nephilim, offspring of divine rebellion and human weakness. They brought chaos, taught forbidden knowledge, and twisted the natural order. But why would such tales be buried, unless they touched something real? The text doesn't just describe monsters. It reveals a spiritual breach. It's like a blueprint of what happens when divine law is broken, and the law of attraction is corrupted. These beings were powerful not just in size, but in intent. They seduce humanity into forgetting its higher nature. Isn't it ironic how forbidden power always comes cloaked in curiosity? Few know this, but even the ancient sect of Manichaeism accepted these writings. They saw truth where others saw myth. They believed the power of the mind could either awaken the divine spark or call in darkness. It all depended on what you aligned with. And these giants? They align with the shadow behind Satan's throne. When you consider that modern culture still echoes these ancient archetypes, giants in media, demons in music, symbols in video games, it makes you wonder. Maybe those ancient stories were more prophecy than fantasy. And maybe the next forgotten texts hold a truth even darker or more liberating. When the book of Revelation spoke of Satan's throne being in Pergamum, it wasn't just metaphor. Historians discovered a literal altar there, massive, commanding, and eerily out of place. That altar now sits in Berlin, in a museum, far from its original home. But spiritually, did it ever stop operating? Or did it simply change forms? Some believe this physical throne represents something deeper, a portal of influence, a symbol of where manipulation sits comfortably on earth, where power is worshipped for its control, not its wisdom. And that's where the law of attraction comes in, because attention gives power and worship creates energy centers. What we focus on, we feed. The power of the mind isn't just an abstract idea. It's a current that flows toward what we idolize. If enough people fear a symbol or obsess over it, they anchor it into reality. That's how thrones are built, through collective belief. The real danger isn't the stone structure. It's the invisible agreement behind it. Now think about this. Why would ancient texts point to a specific location if it didn't matter? Why give coordinates to something so symbolic, unless it's real? And if Satan's throne was a clue, not a metaphor, what other clues have we ignored or removed entirely? During the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther didn't just challenge Rome. He restructured Scripture. 7 entire books were cut from the canon, not because they lacked value, but because they didn't fit his narrative. These texts had ideas about free will, divine justice, and spiritual authority that were inconvenient. Imagine removing key chapters from a manual on how to think, believe, or live. That's not reform, that's redirection. These books held uncomfortable truths, and truths are dangerous when the law of attraction is in play. Because when people think for themselves, they activate the power of the mind, and systems of control start to unravel. One of the excluded books, Wisdom of Solomon, talks about the soul's immortality and the judgment of tyrants. Too subversive? Absolutely. When you realize that these apocryphal books offer deeper insights into spirit, consciousness, and power, well, it's easy to see why Satan's throne needed them out of sight. What else have we blindly accepted as final when it comes to truth? And more importantly, what treasures are hidden in the books they told us not to read? Because the next text they banned didn't just talk about Jesus. It claimed to reveal the very origins of his divine journey. Before the miracles, before the sermons, there was a child. The Proto-Evangelium of James dives into the hidden years of Jesus and his mother, Mary. It describes angels at her birth, divine signs in her youth, and an environment charged with destiny. But the church considered it too legendary, too embellished, and kept it away from the public eye. Yet to everyday people, this gospel felt real. Not just spiritual, but emotional. It painted Mary as more than a silent figure. It gave her a voice, a past, a purpose. And when stories carry that kind of resonance, they awaken the power of the mind. People relate, connect, and begin to ask questions the system wasn't ready to answer. This gospel suggests that the divine is personal, that you don't have to be perfect to be chosen, that miracles begin in the mundane. And isn't that the core of the law of attraction? That your focus, your intention, your energy can shape the world around you, even when you're a child. But at the beginning of Jesus' life was altered, what else was reshaped? Because just as they hid his early years, they also hid what they feared most, stories that gave hope to the oppressed. And the next Bible they gave to an entire population, it was carefully crafted to keep them exactly where they were. What if your only access to God came through a book designed to keep you obedient? That's exactly what happened in the British West Indies. The slave Bible removed nearly 90% of the Old Testament and half of the New. Scriptures about freedom, liberation, and justice were cut on purpose. It wasn't faith. It was programming. Imagine growing up believing that suffering was divine order. That submission was holy. That questioning authority was sin. That's not spirituality. That's the architecture of Satan's throne, dressed in gold leaf. Because if you can rewrite what people believe, you can control what they attract. And the law of attraction isn't neutral. It mirrors what you've been trained to focus on. So while masters read, "Love thy neighbor," slaves heard, "Obey your earthly master." It's the textbook example of hijacking the power of the mind, conditioning someone's spirit to accept chains and calling it sacred. But even stripped texts couldn't stop the whisper of truth from reaching those who were ready to hear it. And here's the irony. In trying to suppress liberation, they expose just how powerful a mind really is. Because when a lie is that carefully built, it means the truth is even more dangerous. And the next banned book? It didn't just hint at judgment. It painted hell in fire, screams, and punishment in disturbing detail. If Dante's Inferno gave you chills, wait until you read the Apocalypse of Peter. This ancient text doesn't hold back. It describes hell with all its fury. Lakes of fire, rivers of blood, souls crying out for mercy. Graphic? Absolutely. But it wasn't meant to scare. It was meant to wake people up. A spiritual alarm clock no one wanted to hear ringing. This book shows heaven too, but it's hell that steals the spotlight. Why? Because it holds up a mirror to our choices. It forces readers to face the cost of their actions. That's the raw force behind the law of attraction. What you create, you meet. What you sow, you reap. And the power of the mind doesn't skip receipts, not even in eternity. Church leaders thought it was too theatrical, too terrifying. But maybe it was just too honest. It didn't sugarcoat judgment. It didn't offer easy loopholes. Instead, it dared to suggest that divine justice was personal, vivid, and unavoidable. In other words, it left no room for complacency, which might explain why it had to go. But here's the twist. What if these intense images weren't just warnings, but instructions? Not on how to suffer, but on how to avoid suffering? Because the next group we're about to meet didn't fear hell. They challenged it, flipped upside down, and practiced something so outrageous it shocked even their enemies. Now brace yourself, because this is where things get strange. The Borborites, a radical Gnostic sect, believed the material world was corrupt and that the God of the Old Testament was not divine, but a deceiver. So how did they respond? With rebellion. Their rituals included consuming bodily fluids and performing acts that defied every religious norm. To them, breaking taboos was spiritual warfare. They believed purity wasn't found in rules, but in knowledge, the forbidden kind. This was gnosis, illumination through direct experience, not dogma. And in that raw belief, they activated a dark version of the power of the mind, liberation through transgression. It's unsettling, but also revealing. What drove them wasn't evil. It was a thirst for hidden truth. They saw the mainstream faith as manipulation, and in their rebellion, twisted as it was, they still operated under the law of attraction. If the world is illusion, then true power lies in breaking the illusion. But where they went wrong was believing destruction was the only way to transcend. Modern culture often dismisses these sects as insane, but their existence proves something bigger. That people, desperate for spiritual power, will go to any length when they believe truth is being hidden. Even the idea of Satan's throne evolves here. It's not just a seat of evil, but a throne built on ignorance. And sometimes, rebellion is just a misdirected cry for freedom. Still, not every heretic wanted chaos. Some simply wanted clarity. And one such man, named Judas, has a gospel so misunderstood, it turns betrayal into destiny and flips the story of Jesus on its head. What if the villain was actually the most loyal? The Gospel of Judas flips the script entirely. Instead of portraying Judas as a traitor, it shows him as the only disciple who truly understood Jesus' mission. Not only did Jesus ask Judas to betray him, it was part of the plan, a cosmic setup, a divine arrangement cloaked in secrecy. This gospel hits hard because it exposes a hidden layer of spiritual intelligence. It reframes betrayal as obedience, darkness as a vehicle for light. Judas didn't fall from grace. He stepped into it. That's the kind of revelation that shakes Satan's throne, because it removes shame and replaces it with purpose. That's not heresy. That's awakening. Now ask yourself, how would your life change if your worst moment was actually your calling? That's the essence of the law of attraction. It's not about perfection. It's about perception. The power of the mind allows us to reframe pain, to find higher meaning in low points. Judas, in this telling, did exactly that. Of course, this was too controversial to stay. The church buried it, literally. The manuscript was lost for over 1,600 years. But now that it's resurfaced, it begs a deeper question. How many other stories were rewritten to protect the system, not the soul? And speaking of buried stories, the next one wasn't even meant for the public. It was hidden beneath the earth, linked to a secret excavation by the Vatican, an operation that, to this day, refuses to be fully explained. In the late 2000s, something strange happened in the ancient city of Tarsus. Reports emerged of a secret excavation, heavily guarded and allegedly directed by the Vatican. No press, no public records, just a sealed-off site and whispers about a hidden Bible. Rumors say it was an original gospel linked to St. Paul, and it didn't match the one we know today. Why the secrecy? If it was just archaeology, why the armored trucks and sudden disappearances of local officials? Some believe this ancient text contained doctrines that challenged church authority, ideas about salvation without institution, power through personal connection with the divine, which, of course, threatened Satan's throne built on fear and hierarchy. This operation hints at something deeper. That history isn't just written, it's managed. And when spiritual truth gets too raw, it gets locked away. Because truth activates the power of the mind, and when that power spreads, control slips. The law of attraction works best when minds are free, not filtered. It's hard to ignore the pattern. Every time people get too close to source knowledge, Someone steps in to protect them from it. But what if the real danger isn't what the scroll says, but what it unlocks inside you? What if you've been told half a story your entire life? And this isn't new. Long before this excavation, another ancient text challenged fate itself, telling the story of a man who refused to die, argued with angels, and laughed in the face of judgment. You probably know Abraham as a father of faith, but in the Testament of Abraham, he's something else entirely, stubborn, witty, and strangely relatable. When the angel of death comes to collect him, Abraham refuses to go. He negotiates, stalls, even fakes ignorance. It's one of the few ancient texts where a biblical figure challenges divine order and wins time. This version of Abraham isn't blindly obedient. He's aware. He questions, doubts, even jokes. And through that, he becomes more human than ever. It's the power of the mind in action. Instead of surrendering, he thinks, feels, chooses. That's not rebellion. That's wisdom. That's alignment with something greater than ritual. The story flips expectations. It suggests that true faith isn't blind obedience, but conscious participation. That even death can be negotiated if your spirit is clear. This kind of mindset breaks the mold of fear-driven religion and quietly disarms Satan's throne. Because when fear fades, freedom steps in, and freedom is magnetic. Abraham's delayed tactic wasn't just about more time on earth. It was a stand for spiritual autonomy. It tells us that even when fate knocks, we have a say. The law of attraction lives in that space between reaction and response. Between I must and I choose. And that choice, it's sacred. But while Abraham debated with angels, others made deals with something far darker. Not for delay, but for talent, glory, and power beyond comprehension. There's something eerily fascinating about the idea of making a deal with the devil. Figures like Niccolò Paganini didn't just master their craft. They transcended it. Audiences were convinced he had help from beyond. His speed, precision, and expression on the violin were so unreal. People whispered that he'd sign a contract with Lucifer himself. But Paganini wasn't alone. From Jonathan Faust to Urban Grandier, history is full of stories where fame and genius came with a dark price tag. These tales aren't just myths, they're warnings. When you chase greatness without alignment, you risk channeling energy from Satan's throne instead of divine purpose. And that matters, because energy is direction. The law of attraction doesn't care if you're invoking angels or demons. It amplifies what you focus on. Power at its core is neutral. It becomes light or shadow depending on your intent. And when the power of the mind is used for ego, the consequences might not come immediately, but they come. History makes that painfully clear. Still, the appeal of forbidden shortcuts never fades. People love the idea of instant mastery, sudden wealth, supernatural charisma. But few realize that real mastery is built, not summoned. That lasting success flows from aligned intention, not hidden pacts. But when society elevates these deal makers as icons, it sets a dangerous example. And the backlash? Oh, it came. In waves of fear, fire, and accusation. Because when the crowd couldn't explain brilliance, they labeled it evil. And soon, the hunt began, not for knowledge, but for scapegoats. And what followed was a brutal obsession with the so-called Book of the Devil. The witch hunts weren't just about fear, they were about control. From Salem to North Berwick, accusations flew like wildfire. And in the middle of it all, the infamous Book of the Devil. Supposedly a real object, it was claimed to be signed in blood, read during rituals, and used as evidence in trials. But here's the question. Was it ever real, or just a tool of hysteria? Women, mostly healers, midwives, and outsiders, were the primary targets. And suddenly, wisdom became witchcraft. Independence became rebellion. In truth, these people often practice forms of natural spirituality that threaten religious structures. That's the real threat to Satan's throne. Not evil, but enlightenment outside the system. The law of attraction played out in reverse here. Fear spread, belief followed, and the accused became guilty by projection. Collective focus created collective punishment. It's a brutal reminder that the power of the mind can also be weaponized, not just to heal or build, but to destroy, when directed by fear instead of insight. And yet, Even in the horror of those flames, a strange resilience emerged. A legacy of hidden knowledge passed quietly through generations. Herbal remedies, lunar cycles, protective chants. Things that still survive today. Things that whisper, we were never evil. We were just unapproved. But while these witches were burned in public squares, another man, a knight, a noble, a hero, was falling into darkness behind closed castle doors. His name was Gillis de Rice, and his descent makes all the others look like shadows of something much deeper. At first glance, Gillis de Rice was a hero, a nobleman, a knight, a companion of Joan of Arc. But beneath the medals and the armor, something sinister was growing. After her death, his life took a dark turn, one that would shock even his closest allies. What followed were unspeakable crimes, cloaked in ritual, driven by desperation for power, and tied to the darkest corners of the occult. He wasn't just killing, he was experimenting. Some accounts claim he believed that blood and terror could summon wealth, favor, even immortality. This wasn't myth. This was a man who stood in cathedrals by day and conducted horrors by night. And behind it all, a pact, a silent contract with forces rooted in the shadows of Satan's throne. This case isn't just a medieval scandal. It's a masterclass in corrupted manifestation. Gillis used the power of the mind, but twisted it. He believed his thoughts could command the supernatural. And, in a way, they did. But instead of abundance, he attracted ruin. Proof that the law of attraction answers all requests, even the darkest ones. There's a disturbing lesson here. Not all who seek power are fools. Some are just too aware how energy works, and too broken to use it well. Gillis didn't lack knowledge. He lacked alignment. And that's what made him dangerous. Not his belief in demons, but his belief that he could control them. So what does this all mean for you? That ancient secrets, twisted minds, and banned books all lead to the same conclusion. Knowledge is never neutral. But now that we've walked through the forbidden, it's time to reveal what they didn't want you to know from the start. So now that you've seen what was removed, censored, and buried, what will you do with it? Will you keep living under the narrative that has been molded to keep you obedient? Or will you start questioning everything you've been taught? Because here's an uncomfortable truth. Hidden knowledge is withheld power. And if even Satan's throne was designed to keep you away from the truth, maybe it's time to turn the tables. Do you really believe that these books were banned by chance? Or is there something in these texts that could change your life, your faith, your worldview? If even the law of attraction and the power of the mind have been there, masked for centuries, maybe it's time to take control. Now it's up to you. Which of these hidden truths impacted you the most? Which of these stories made you see everything differently? Let me know in the comments. I want to know. And of course, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because this is just the beginning. There's a lot more that's been hidden and that you deserve to discover.